Well, would you believe it? We are on book 8. And welcome to the D. Louise book series. It's Christina, K-O-S-T-I-N-A. This is where we read books and talk books. And I hope you are having a good day. I'm trying to learn sign language. I'm learning it very massively slowly. My pal here is going off already, and my video just started. You'll have to check my New Year's Eve posting to see her identity. Come here. Oh well, we have bing, 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 bing. What? Bing, bing. 8 bings. What a way to start a video off with interruption. Clock interruption. It's over 30 or 40 years old? Yes, ma'am. So, we are going to talk about Book 8 in the Victoria Thompson Gaslight series, Sarah Brandt, Frank Malloy, Book 8, Murder in Little Italy. And we've got some stuff to talk about. Now, Sarah Brandt is a midwife who comes from a very wealthy family. Her parents are Elizabeth and Felix Decker, and due to stuff years ago, they have been estranged. They are currently working through their relationship, and they are slowly doing dinners again and meals together and doing other stuff together. So they're slowly mending the relationship. We've also got two new three new characters, recurring characters that are joining our family. The first two we met in book 5, I believe. Maeve and Aggie, the two girls from the mission where Sarah was volunteering. And Frank Malloy is a detective sergeant with the New York Police Department, and he's working under Roosevelt, Commissioner Roosevelt. So we get some history. I'm enjoying the heck out of this. So let's just back up a little bit. And I just want to, the very last page of Murder on Lenox Hill. This was book 7. And Aggie is playing with Brian. And for the first time ever, she talks. And Sarah and the rest of them are hanging back in the hallway as they hear a voice. Just then they heard a loud thump from upstairs, reminding them they left the children alone too long. I guess we'd better check on them, Sarah said, glad to change the subject. Malloy followed her through the house to the stairway from above. She could hear someone talking, and for an instant she wondered whose voice it was. In the next instant she realized whose it had to be. It was Aggie's voice. She was talking to Brian. Sarah stopped dead, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked up the stairs toward the sound. Behind her, Malloy started to speak, but she hushed him, putting a finger to her lips. From above, the tiny sound floated down to them. I know you can't hear me, Brian, and that's why I'm telling you. Everybody thinks my name is Aggie, but it's not. It's Catherine. Sarah turned to Malloy as tears flooded her eyes. She saw her own wonder reflected on his face. She can talk, she whispered. She never knew which of them moved first, but in the next instant she was in his arms, clinging to him as she sobbed against his chest. She wept for joy for the child that was now her daughter, her grief for the husband she had lost, her sorrow for the pain she'd seen too many innocents suffer these past weeks, and her gratitude that she had Malloy to share it with him. As he crushed her to him, she knew that no matter what happened, they would be all right. And it is freezing in my house. So, We start off Murder in Little Italy with Sarah spending time with Maeve and Aggie. Maeve is the other young lady that they got from the mission, and Maeve is there to take care of Aggie when Sarah goes out on her midwifing because she gets calls at all hours of the night and day. So she gets a knock on the door, and she's being told that she needs to come right away, that a baby is coming. And so she goes to deliver the baby, and there's some questions because they all believe the baby is premature. Apparently, it's supposed to be only 7 months, but when it comes out, it's fully formed and a very big child, and it's a boy. So there's a lot of little questioning going on here, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling. And there's also some discrimination going on here. Apparently, the mother of the baby is Irish, and the father of the baby is Italian. And apparently that is a huge major deal during this time, as apparently we know bigotry runs rampant in this country for all generations. And I would like to point out that this country was founded on immigrants, and that we are all immigrants to this country. Yes, you may have been here 500 or 600 years, well, since at least 1600s, but the American Indians are the only native people to this country. They're the only ones that were, maybe one day they weren't, who knows? We haven't gotten back that far yet. But the rest of us came from Europe and other parts of the world. So we're all immigrants to this country, and it was built on immigrants and immigration to this country. And at one point or another, everybody hated everybody else. And in this particular point in history, the Italians and the Irish don't like each other. So, and apparently all the Irish are cops. And every immigrant had its different role in history. And Chinese actually probably did the Chinese food in the restaurant the best, I guess. You are looking so cute today, Missy. So she delivers the baby, and then she goes home after all the turmoil of the night before. And it's a little bit, she's a little uneasy about leaving, but she leaves anyway. When she comes back the next morning to check on the mother and said baby, it has been discovered that the mother was murdered overnight. And Sarah first worries when she learns that the mother was deceased, was concerned that it was her fault, that she did something wrong. Because every once in a while in the midwife stuff can go wrong. But Sarah was pretty sure that this girl was fine when she left. So when she investigates the room, she discovers that the woman has been murdered. She's got some broken fingernails, and there's blood on the pillow, and it is later determined that she was smothered, and she's got some feathers in her throat because it was a feather pillow. So then she has them call, a cop comes up, they call for a cop comes up, she says, please send for Frank Malloy. He gets Frank Malloy, and we also get our new recurring character, Gino Donatelli, and he becomes a really good friend to Frank and Sarah and to Maeve and Catherine. He becomes almost a family member eventually. It takes a few books, but he will get there. So then we learn that the family's uncle or the grandmother's uh, uh, brother-in-law is Ugo, and apparently he's the leader of the Black Hand. And apparently this was a big mob organization during this time period. And apparently you paid them protection money, and if you paid them the money, then they wouldn't kill you. You do or you don't. This country was built on this stuff. So then the Irish girls, the infant's mother, Nancy, her name was Nancy. Nancy's mom comes and discovers that her daughter is dead, and she wants to take possession of the baby. She is quite poor, and she doesn't have the financial wherewithal to take care of the baby, but she wants to take care of the baby because it is her grandson. And then a discussion arises within the Italian family. Maria, who was unable to bear children, wants the child as her own. And we will learn later there's another reason there too why the child needs to stay with the Italians, but we will get to that. That's a huge spoiler. And I will let you know that all of my book reviews are spoilers, all of them. I usually do not reveal the ending or the whodunit, but I'll tell you the rest of the book. Please don't hate me for that. So Ugo is the brother-in-law. He does not like his sister-in-law. Apparently his brother, he wanted his brother to come to the United States to earn a living, to send money back to Italy, and the wife wouldn't let her husband go without her. And by the time they had enough money for the family to come over, the brother was sick, and they wouldn't let him leave the ship when he got to New York because he was very, very ill, and they sent him back to Italy to die alone. And Ugo is very upset with his sister-in-law for doing that. So there's a lot of tension there, and any chance he gets, he points the finger at his sister-in-law. And then they start, some people outside the world who are like to encourage the angst between the Irish and the Italians, start riots and ruckuses outside the restaurant. So then we have, and I always like to share these, and I think I'm gonna do a video just on her at one point when we finish the series. That'll be my little extra bonus series. Mrs. Ellsworth. Mrs. Ellsworth is Sarah's neighbor, and she's like almost like a mom or a grandmom, and she's very humorous. She's very caring and loving, and her son is Nelson, who Sarah got out of, cleared of any wrongdoing in his job when he was accused, and when he got mixed up with a young lady who was trying to milk him for all his money. Talk about a very early scam thing, or a grift, as Mavis Freestone would say. So Sarah took Aggie for a walk the next morning to pick up several of the more reputable tapers. Aggie almost had to run to keep up with her as she hurried back home to see what they had to say about Nancy's death. When she arrived, she found Mrs. Ellsworth and Maeve in the kitchen with all the ingredients for an English pudding. "Good morning, Mrs. Branch," she said cheerfully. "Going to catch up with the news? I want to see what they have to say about a friend of mine. Maeve, will you take Aggie upstairs for a little while?" "Mrs. Ellsworth was going to show me how to make a pudding," Maeve said, not wanting to hurt the older woman's feelings, but also wanted to eat the pudding. "There's plenty of time for that," Mrs. Ellsworth said cheerfully. "Give me and Mrs. Brandt a few minutes to talk, and I'll call you down when we're finished so we can start the pudding." "Yes, ma'am." As soon as they were out of earshot, Mrs. Ellsworth's smile faded. "What's wrong?" "One of my patients was murdered the night before last," Sarah said, leaving the papers on the kitchen table. "Good heavens," Mrs. Ellsworth said. I was afraid something like that would happen. I saw a crow on your back fence on Monday. It's an omen of death. I didn't say anything because I know how you feel about my superstitions. I was just hoping you wouldn't have to deliver that day. That's Mrs. Ellsworth for you. Then one of the Italian gentlemen, one of the sons, comes and says that the baby's crying. Sarah must come. So they end up having to get some goat's milk because the regular milk is not working for the child, and because there's no mother to nurse the child, their situation goes there. Then we have Frank spend some time investigating the murder. He talks with the mother of the Nancy's mom, and it turns out that Nancy was very promiscuous, and anybody could have been the father of her child, because they're claiming that because the child was fully born and not 2 months early, then this woman did not know her son in June. She only met him in August, so obviously he could not have been the father of her child. So there's a little paternity issue going on here. So Frank goes and talks with Nancy's mom, learns that she was hanging out at all these different places, and maybe there is someone else who could potentially be the father of the infant. We spent a lot of time taking care of the baby. We spent a lot of time negotiating between the Irish and the Italians. Mr. Roosevelt gets involved, and he says that Tammany Hall, the people in charge, want the baby given to Mrs. O'Hara because the baby is Irish and she's Irish, and they will give her a pension to help support the baby. Mrs. Brandt goes and talks to her and tells her that the baby's going to need all this extra care. And Mrs. O'Hara concedes that she is not capable of giving all this extra care to this special needs child. He's going to need, she's going to, like with any child, it wakes up during the night several times, and she's going to have to feed it at all hours of the day and make up a schedule and buy clothing and take it. And I think the mother's a little overwhelmed by this. And one thing leads to another, and we find out who the murderer is. There's a couple of little mishaps at the end. Sarah is in jeopardy for a few minutes. But the main takeaway from this book, I want to do one last thing before we get there. The one takeaways from this book is that, the last book too, but we know that Aggie's real name is Catherine. At one point, Sarah goes to Aggie and says, I was thinking of changing your name to Catherine because I really like that name. Would you like that? And Aggie's like, So they're going to start calling her Catherine in the next book or so. So we solve the murder. We find out why this person was murdered. We find out the reason behind it. And then we have a little extra piece at the end that I wanted to touch on. Frank is called to the commissioner's office. And we have been talking about Sarah's husband, Tom Brandt, who was murdered about 4 years ago now in book time. And his murder was never solved. And Sarah's father was told that it was a robbery gone wrong, and he never pursued it. But Frank informs him that the reason the cops told him that was because they didn't want to spend the time investigating without a few dollars, because back in this time the cops weren't paid all that much, and they needed a little bit of a handout of encouragement to do the investigation. And since they weren't getting paid to do the investigation, they weren't going to do it, because apparently Tom Brandt, he had his watch, his pockets had coins in them, he was fully dressed, He had his doctor's bag. He was not robbed in any way, shape, or form. So Frank has been looking into the case a little bit here and there for Sarah, and Mr. Decker gets involved, and he also provides Frank with information about the fact that some of his patients had crushes on him, and there's a whole bunch of circumstances with that. So at the end, we get a little note from Mr. Roosevelt. Finally, Commissioner cleared her throat. I had a letter from Mrs. Brandt. Frank shouldn't have been surprised. They agreed she would contact Roosevelt. Did you? Yes, and I understand from her that you have uncovered new information about her husband's death. He made it sound like an accusation. Frank resisted the instinctive urge to be defensive. Yes, I found a witness and some other interesting facts that weren't known when Dr. Brandt was killed. After all this time, Roosevelt asked skeptically. It's been 3 years, hasn't it? Almost 4, Frank said. Roosevelt peered at him intently, though his spectacles. About this witness suddenly come forward after almost 4 years. He heard I was asking about the case, Frank lied. He actually hunted the boy down after hearing about him from an informant. He wasn't even sure if he could find him again. What about this new information? Where did it come from? Felix Decker gave it to me. Are you saying he had information about who killed Dr. Brandt and he didn't use it at the time to find the killer? Roosevelt demanded in outrage. He didn't think it had anything to do with Dr. Brandt's murder. The officers who investigated believed Dr. Brandt had been killed by someone trying to rob him. But you don't? Dr. Brandt wasn't robbed, Frank said, and the witness heard him arguing with his killer. When I heard and saw what Mr. Decker had found out, I started thinking Dr. Brandt had been killed by somebody he knew and not by some petty criminal. Roosevelt removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes before carefully replacing his glasses. Mrs. Brandt has asked me to reopen the case and assign you to work it, he said. That was what Frank had asked her to do, of course. He had been hoping for it. In fact, he couldn't tell how Roosevelt felt about it, so he waited. I don't have many men on the force that I can rely on, Detective Sergeant. You've proven yourself to be one of those few. I can't spare you to spend all your time on the 4-year-old case. I understand, sir. But Mrs. Brandt is an old friend and she deserves to know the truth if that's possible. I'll give you permission to investigate it so long as it doesn't interfere with your regular work. I'll inform Chief Conklin. So he's going to start working on the case legally, professionally, on the books, a little bit here and there. And we will definitely find out what happened in future books. And if you could please hit the like and subscribe. I could use some likes. I did a bunch of shorts recently, and my analytics were off the walls. But I have surpassed 200. I'm trying not to jinx it. But thank you, everybody that has subscribed. It's been awesome. And I hope you will check out my Star Trek Fridays and Flashback Mondays, where we do over 30 books from my Romantic Times book review magazine. And if then on Fridays, if you like this author, then maybe you like that author. We started with the Bridgertons. If you like the Bridgertons, then maybe you like the Mallorys, the Sherbrooks, the Wrens, and the rest of them. So please check out all those videos. And join me in a couple days for Murder in Chinatown. We're feeling like Italian food now. Gotta go get some spaghetti. Have a good one.